Kenya's government has been defiant in its response to the attack on a university in which 147 people died. The country's interior minister said it will not give in to terrorism after Al-Qaeda-linked Shabaab group said it was behind the killings. Well, Simon Haselock is a former advisor to the African Union and he's here with me now. Simon Haselock, an appalling attack. What's your reaction to it?
Well, I think, sadly, it's part of this sort of escalation or inflation of brutality in the region. I mean, Al-Shabaab has lost the headlines to Boko Haram and IS, etc. And this is part of that horrible, rise in what can you do to grab back the headlines. And I think in many ways that succeeded. I mean, they've got themselves back on the front foot as far as the competition for media coverage is concerned and isolated places like Yemen, etc. To get their story out. So it's part of that, I'm afraid.
And clearly they last made headlines in this country and around the world with their attack on the Westgate shopping centre, which targeted Westerners predominantly. Yeah. In what way is this attack different? I mean, it's clearly attacked Kenyans, but what would you say about their modus operandi?
Well, I think it's actually pretty part of the same narrative. I mean, I think, one, as I said, they're trying to recapture some of the lost headlines they've got to other organisations. Secondly, it's part of the fact that actually Al-Shabaab is actually on the decline within Somalia. I mean, it's suffered a loss of most of the territory that it used to control. A lot of the sort of more moderate nationalist members have sort of left the organisation. You're left with a much harder line, much tighter group who now find it easier to operate outside of Somalia than they do in. So this is sort of the global jihadi element of Al-Shabaab as opposed to the sort of nationalist, more moderate elements inside Somalia.
And a number of countries have committed troops to the African Union force that's fighting in Somalia, and yet it appears to be Kenya that is attacked more regularly by Al-Shabaab. Why is that?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, proximity. It's very close. Northern Kenya is broadly a Somali ethnic population. They speak Somali, so there's a lot of sympathy there. There is a lot of suspicion, certainly in southern Somalia, about the reasons why the Kenyans got involved. And also, the Kenyans perhaps have not reacted very well to the emergence of terrorism, Somali terrorism, in terms of actually acting in a pretty harsh way against the Somali community, which has only given them sort of more recruits and more pressure. So I think there are a number of reasons, and primarily it's easy for them to operate there.
And how will Kenyans be feeling? Presumably they'll be feeling deeply vulnerable. This is a terrible attack, 147 people killed. Will there be any pressure from the public on the government to pull their troops out of Somalia?
I'm not so sure whether there'll be pressure to pull the troops out. I mean, but there's certainly a lot of pressure on them to do something more effective. I mean, we're nice to see that the tourist industry, in fact, in Kenya has been devastated, particularly along the Swahili coast by these attacks in the past, and this is just another example of that sort of thing. I mean, I think it's very difficult to see how they will respond, but I mean, I think there will be. I think it's quite. It was quite encouraging to see from your report that there was a joint protest, including Muslims within Garissa yesterday, about these attacks. Because I think one of the reasons that we need to be worried is this attempt to isolate Muslims and Christians within Kenya, and therefore to create the notion amongst the minority Muslims that they're being isolated, and therefore improve the attempts of Al-Shabaab to recruit there. So I think it's good that demonstration showed some form of unity between Christians and Muslims, and hopefully that's the sort of pressure that the government will see. They will unify against this threat rather than separate and fracture.
You've been an advisor to the African Union. How would you advise Kenya in this situation now?
Well, I think they have to think much smarter and much more longer term in the way they approach this. I mean, clearly they have some command and control problems in terms of how they respond to these attacks. I mean, they do seem to be slow in reacting, and they probably do need to improve those sorts of elements of how they deal with it. But also they need to woo their own Somali population in a more effective way, rather than just trying to show instant aggression against them to pacify some of the more vociferous members of the Kenyan community. So I think they need to think a longer-term policy. I mean, one of the problems in the northern areas of Kenya where this attack in Garissa is, it's been long underinvested. It's a classic place where they need to improve the opportunity. And there is a big plan to invest substantially in that area. And one of the worries, of course, is that the deteriorating security situation might actually prevent that from happening, and of course that shouldn't be the case. They need to invest, and they need to improve the sort of lot of ordinary Kenyans in that part of the country.
And you talked about the desire by al-Shabaab to grasp the headlines again, this kind of brutal, almost competitiveness with other appalling groups as well, doing similar things. And presumably one of the reasons they want the headlines is that it acts as some kind of grim recruiting tool.
Well, it's not just recruitment; it's also funding. I mean, they need to get funding, and it's like business in a way. You've got to advertise, you've got to capture the zeitgeist in order to do that. And so, although it's horrific, I mean, I'm afraid that is it. Recruitment and money is the thing that keeps these organisations afloat.
Okay, well, Simon Haselock, fascinating to get your insights into what's been an appalling attack. But Simon, thank you.
Thank you very much.